Good things come in square packages. Sandwiches are square. Everyone loves sandwiches. Chessboards, even the squares on the board are square. Lots of squares in chess. Post-it notes, which are the best kind of notes, all square. Pizza boxes. The pizza inside isn't square, but mankind has yet to discover how to make a circular pizza box, so we'll give that to Team Square. Date squares, even though those are usually cut into rectangles because Debbie doesn't give a crap about using proper quadrilateral terminology. Stupid cow. Good date squares though. I'm saying everyone loves squares for all sorts of things, and when it comes to retro handhelds, there aren't really any square ones. I mean, yeah, there's one. The Powkiddy RGB30. It has a square screen, but it's a horizontal handheld, and nobody with half a brain likes horizontal handhelds. If only there was a handheld like the RGB30 that played all the same great games, but wasn't horizontal, but vertical, as nature intended. Ah well, I guess we'll never get that. Oh my god. Debbie! What did I tell you about those date squares? Hey there, how you doing? I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video today. A while back, I reviewed this thing, the Powkiddy RGB30. It is a retro handheld with a square screen. And when you heard about this thing, you probably thought something like, square, but most retro systems are 4x3, and some are 16x9. Why would you want a square screen just so you could play Game Boy or whatever? And if you thought that, you were wrong, as usual. Because the RGB30 is an amazing handheld. Not only is it the best way to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, not only is it also great to play NES games on because the ratio of the NES was actually 8x7, which is squarish. Not only is it fine to play 4x3 games because the screen is so big and high resolution that those games look better than ever, but it's also the perfect handheld to play Pico 8 games, which are amazing. If you're not playing Pico 8, then trust me, you're stupid. I made a whole video about Pico 8 and why it's so great. And I have another one coming up where I'll show you my favorite Pico 8 games. And so get subscribed if you haven't yet because you do not want to miss that one, unless you do. In which case you can subscribe anyways, so you can make sure that you do miss it. But here's the thing, not everyone likes horizontal handhelds. I'm not necessarily one of those guys. I love a good RP4 Pro or RG556 or even a little Zazbizzle if I'm feeling feisty. But when it comes to certain systems, mostly the really retro stuff like Game Boy, Game Boy Color, NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, I generally prefer to play them on vertical devices. I loved the RGB30 so much, but after I made my first review, I almost immediately wanted Powkiddy to make a vertical version. But to my shock and delight, the handheld gods heard my prayers and gave us this, the Powkiddy RGB20SX. And I hope you're ready because we're gonna check this thing out to see if my nerd fantasy was worth becoming a reality, and we'll try to help you decide if you need some RGB20SX in your life. This RGB20SX was kindly provided to me for review by my friends over at Go Game Geek, and you can buy it from them if you want one. There's a link in the thingy below. The box here is mighty fancy. This just screams retro. Retro! In here we get the device itself and a micro SD card. This is the 256 gigabyte micro SD card that I got here, which has games on it, obviously. Under here there's some stickers, which I'm not going to bother with because I'm not a child, and a USB A to C cable. No screen protector, so be careful. So if you're not aware, the specs of the RGB20SX are exactly the same as the RGB30 and basically every other retro handheld at this price place. So we're looking at yet another RK3566 device with 1GB of LPDDR4 RAM. But here the display is a 4-inch square ratio OCA IPS screen with a resolution of 720 by 720, 5000 mAh battery, and also built-in 5 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. However, I will mention that the Bluetooth doesn't work out of the box on the stock firmware. More on that in a bit. Here it is next to its shorter, wider brother, the RGB30, and its much wider, much shorter brother, the RGB10 Max 3. Hey, these look pretty good together. The whole Powkiddy family. I actually like that these all feel like a matching set. I might just give these a premium space on my shelf of Chinese e-waste. Ooh, fancy. On the front, we got a big square screen, D-pad in the upper configuration, face buttons, single 1-watt front-facing speaker, dual snitch-style thumbsticks, a start and select button, and a placebo button that does nothing. On the left side, we have a power button, reset button, and an SD card hole for our games card. On the right side, we have volume up and down buttons and a second SD card hole for our system card. Underneath, we have a few holes, USB-C hole for charging, headphone hole, and another USB-C hole for connecting peripherals. On the top, we have a mini HDMI hole for connecting this to a TV or monitor, which does work. And around back, we have bumpers and triggers and a sticker that isn't centered. And that makes my OCD sad. The controls are actually pretty decent for the most part. My main test is in a game where you can walk in 8 directions, like Zombies Ate My Neighbors on Super Nintendo. I figure if I can aim and shoot exactly in the direction that I'm trying every single time and it feels right, then it's all good. And this feels fine. Way better than lots of D-pads that I've tested. This one's actually better than the one on my RGB30 for some reason. Maybe I just won the D-pad lottery though. I don't like that the D-pad has kind of a sharp edge to it, and also the face buttons. I prefer a bit of a smoother edge to those. Nothing terrible though. Good buttons overall. Nice, satisfying membrane feel to them. The sticks are standard cheap knockoff snitch style sticks, which is to say that they're not great, but they'll get the job done. And the bumpers and triggers have a good feel to them. A good click, easy to press, not too easy, though not overly loud. I'm not a huge fan of the way Powkiddy usually does their bumpers and triggers, and then when I found out they had big, thick triggers that stuck out on this, I was pretty sure I'd hate it, but you know what? These actually aren't too bad. They give your fingers a substantial place to rest, and honestly, I really like the way it feels in my hands. Not great for the pocket though. This is a bigger device. I probably wouldn't bother carrying this around in my pocket anyways, and these flared triggers certainly don't help. They definitely dig into your leg, and if someone kicks you in the Powkiddy, that could act like a wedge and chop your leg clean off. Not worth the risk, trust me. The screen on the RGB20SX is really the star of the show here. When I first heard of the RGB30, I was like, nah, no one needs that. But once I got it in my hands and started using it, I realized that this was the device that has been missing from my life. And the screen on the RGB20SX is the same screen, but that's a good thing, because now we get a square screen for systems that use a more square aspect ratio, except it's vertical. The screen is 720 by 720, which is a ton of pixels to work with. The pixel density is so high that you can run with integer scaling on lots of systems and get a very large screen, or you can run without integer scaling and get an experience that feels really good, close to how it would feel if you were using integer scaling. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then check out this video because I explain all about integer scaling in that one. Long story short, this screen is incredible. Not only because of the reasons that I already said, but it's just a high quality screen. It's bright and clear, but it also gets quite dim. It's got great color saturation, really solid contrast. I know it doesn't look that impressive in the video. Filming screens never does, but you just gotta trust me. A screen of this quality usually doesn't come on devices as cheap as this. The system that we have on here is Gelos. That's what comes out of the box, which is fine. There is a more recent build of Rocknix and ArcOS, and I'm definitely gonna tinker around with those and try them both and see which one works better for me. But Gelos out of the box is good enough. Everything works except for one thing. Bluetooth. Apparently that's a thing with the stock firmware on this device. You need to use a custom firmware that has the Bluetooth fix applied if you need blue on your teeth. However, Gelos out of the box is very nice to see. However, you'll find that lots of systems have pretty weird default settings applied, so you want to choose your own settings to make sure that you get the scaling the way that you like it. I had this thing ready to rock exactly the way that I like within like 5 minutes. You can use Wi-Fi for retro achievements. You can download themes and change the themes to customize the look of the system. You get pre-scraped box art and all the controls are set up correctly. Like, not bad, right? And I would be a bad tech dweeb if I didn't point out that the games lists are really good here. So you won't get a bunch of duplicate games and foreign games. You'll get complete sets of Atari, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, a huge arcade game set, and you'll get a ton of higher end stuff. Depending on which size card you get, you'll get a whole bunch of PS1, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, Nintendo DS, PSP. You want to play Barbie Pet Rescue? You can play Barbie Pet Rescue. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the actual gaming experience because it's not really that different from the RGB30, to be honest. And then the performance isn't any different than any of the bazillion other RK3566 devices. So you'll be able to play everything up to and including PS1, and then you'll get most Nintendo 64 and Nintendo DS and lots of PSP and Dreamcast. If you're playing 4x3 systems, you'd think that it's not ideal, but it's actually a super enjoyable experience because even though the screen is square, it's big enough that the games are as big as they would be on a 3.5-inch screen device like the Miu Mini Plus or whatever. And you can apply bezels to cover up the black parts of the screen. 16:9 systems get a little too small with big black bars unless you stretch it. But if you do that here, you don't deserve a retro handheld and you're not allowed to watch my channel anymore. You monster. The star of the show is any system with a square-ish ratio or vertical ratio. This is my new favorite way to play shmups games. I liked shmups on the RGB30, but for these games, I prefer when the screen is up on top. I guess because it feels more like an arcade, and it is so nice to be able to play these games and actually see them properly, nice and big. If you're a vertical shooter fan, this is currently the best device that you can get that plays them this well. And there are lots of Nintendo DS games that will benefit from the vertical screen too. I probably prefer to play them with a big screen that you can swap between, but for those games that need to have the stacked screens, this is the way to do it. The NES is actually a great system for this thing. It was an 8:7 ratio, which is not far off from a square ratio, and it fills out the screen nicely. And 720p is a ton of pixel density, so if you use a shader like the Pixelate shader, you have enough resolution to work with that it's literally not noticeable at all. It looks like integer scaling. This applies to most systems, by the way. But of course, the star of the show is the square ratio systems, like Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Yes, I know that they're not perfect square, they're 10:9, but close enough, come on. These systems look amazing on this screen. I have developed a new love for Game Boy and Game Boy Color over my time doing this YouTube tech thing, and I have wanted the perfect Game Boy device for years at this point. The RGB30 was close, but it wasn't Game Boy shaped. With the RGB20SX, I finally have a Game Boy that plays Game Boy perfect on a square screen, just like the Game Boy, and now with the vertical form factor of a Game Boy. If only they had this in the Game Boy DMG color scheme. Oh well, a dweeb can dream. And finally, the other amazing system that is amazing on the RGB20SX is Pico 8. And Pico 8 is a square ratio system, and it scales beautifully and plays beautifully on this thing. If you're into modern indie games with pixel graphics, and I am personally very into those, it's kind of a thing with me, then you'll love playing them on this thing. And these games feel like they should be played in a vertical format to me. So again, yet another system that this thing is my new favorite device for. So, should you buy an RGB20SX? Well, yeah, if you like it. If you don't have a square format system and you want to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color and Nintendo and Pico 8 in the best way, then you definitely should. But you can also go for the RGB30 if you're more of a horizontal device dweeb. If you're gonna play 4x3 systems, then I still think this is a great choice because the games look so good on this amazing screen. However, you will be missing out on some pocketability. And if you value that, then there are plenty of playable yet portable, practical, pocketable products. I love it to bits. I would 100% buy this again for myself because I personally need to have this thing in my life for Game Boy, NES, and Pico 8 games. But don't get it if you don't care about that stuff. It's not a must-buy device. It's just yet another thing to consider in the crowded retro handheld jungle, full of retro monkeys eating retro bananas. And if you want to buy one, you should buy it from Go Game Geek. There's a link in the thingy below. And that brings us to the end. If you enjoyed this video, then definitely check out my RGB30 video because you'll probably like that one too. Link on the screen now and down in the thingy below. And that's it from me. Tell your mom I said hi. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.